Hi, and welcome to the 104th TiddlyWiki Hangout. I'm Jeremy Ruston, the creator of TiddlyWiki, and let me introduce the other people who are here with me on the call. From my left, there's Andreas Hahn. Andreas, would you like to say hello, where you are in the world, and something about your work with TiddlyWiki?
Yes, hello. My name is Andreas. I'm from Germany. I've been following along with TiddlyWiki for a couple of years now, and I've written a few plugins in the past. And that's about it. I've
Indeed.
become more of a selfish TiddlyWiki user in the few recent years, I would say.
And do you go by the name Andreas in all your TiddlyWiki interactions?
Yes, mostly.
You don't use it. You're not any of the aliases that we're seeing on the groups.
No.
Okay. I get quite confused sometimes by the people who go by normal human names and the people that go by what sound like they could be, I don't know, places or something. Anyway, here's Evan. Would you like to say hello, where you are in the world, and something about your work with TiddlyWiki?
Hello, my name is Evan. I am in the barren winter hell that is Ames, Iowa, and
That's awesome.
I'm a frequent TiddlyWiki user who has recently been developing a quite a lot of plugin code for enabling TiddlyWiki to do more involved computations and number crunching, functional programming, and timers and other nonsense, so that I can build more complicated apps in it.
It's great to have you here, Evan. And you've mentioned before that you've also got an interest in music technology, which I think sometimes.
Oh, it's worse than that. I have a job in music technology.
A life in music technology. Indeed. Well, it's great to have you here, Evan, and it's great to have all of your work that you're doing on this refresh work as well. Next, Mario. Hi. Would you like to say hello where you are and say something about your work with TiddlyWiki?
Yeah, hi, my name is Mario Pitsch from Austria, near Salzburg. We only have, I don't know, about 5 millimeters of snow at the moment. We used to have a little bit more, but yeah, it's plus degrees at the moment. Yeah, I'm with TiddlyWiki for quite a long time. I started with TiddlyWiki-Classic, made some plugins. Then I think since the beginning with TiddlyWiki 5, I had discussions with Jeremy, some of them. Now I did create a plugin for Firefox, which lets us save to the download directory. And also I did record several videos about some basic introductions, how to contribute to TiddlyWiki, how to set up a development environment. Yeah, from scratch. Yeah, I think we should try to tell our new users how they can have easy contributions. And I tried to record some basic videos that really start with the very basics.
Indeed, and I think they've had great feedback from the groups, as videos always do. It seems to be a favored way for learning for lots of people.
Yeah. And I really started with a virtual machine, with a new one, so that I had all the messages from the system about what is it called, the firewall and all this stuff. So it really looks like a new system that has no development stuff on it. Yeah. So yeah, that's the way I wanted to do it.
Excellent. Well, Mario, Evan, and Andreas, thank you very much all for joining me today. So we're mostly, as usual, we'll have a fairly freewheeling discussion, but before we kicked off the broadcast, we did jot down a couple of points to cover. One housekeeping point from me is that regular viewers of the Hangouts will know that we're actually, or that I hold Hangouts basically sitting on a train track where the express train of Wi-Fi failure may wipe out my connectivity at any moment, which happened quite a bit last time. And I've been having so many Wi-Fi problems that my telephone is now at its limit of 4G, so I don't even have a fallback if the Wi-Fi does fall down. So that's by way of a warning that if the worst comes to the worst, I think actually what will happen is Andreas, Evan, and Mario will be able to carry on the discussion without me, and I'll watch it later. Okay, so the first proper thing to talk about was a bit of GitHub housekeeping. So right since the beginning of TiddlyWiki 5, the TiddlyWiki 5 repo has been part of my own personal GitHub account. So the GitHub URL to get to TiddlyWiki 5 is github.com/germaline/TiddlyWiki5. And that made sense to me right at the beginning because TiddlyWiki 5 at that point was kind of a personal experiment of mine, and it was quite a long time before it became anything like a sort of official community thing. But it's turned out to be a problem because when you have a repo in your personal account, the policies you have for giving other people access, selective access to parts of the repo are not nearly so well developed. So what I propose to do in the next few days is to migrate the TiddlyWiki 5 repo from Germaline to TiddlyWiki 5. And then, in fact, Mario is already an administrator of the TiddlyWiki organization on GitHub. And by virtue of that, Mario will then be able to set up some of the things that we'll be talking about in a moment. Hopefully this shouldn't be any disruption. If after we've made the transition, if you visit github.com/germaline/TiddlyWiki5, or if you've got a local repo that tries to sync with github.com/germaline/TiddlyWiki5, then apparently it will get silently redirected to point to the new github.com/TiddlyWiki/TiddlyWiki5 repo. It remains to be seen whether it really is seamless, but the searching I've done suggests that other people have done it, and so hopefully I've run into any problems that there are.
So you will make a new organization, TiddlyWiki 5?
No. No, I was going to reuse. That's a really interesting point, and exactly why we should be discussing it, really. But no, I was thinking of reusing the existing TiddlyWiki organization.
TiddlyWiki organization. Okay, but then move TiddlyWiki.
Right. You're kind of right. Yeah.
Yeah. Then we move TiddlyWiki-Classic to TiddlyWiki-Classic organization, because TiddlyWiki-Classic has an organization.
Yeah, I'd take your point. I mean, well, look, here's one thing: is that I'm very conscious that there are still a lot of TiddlyWiki-Classic users out there, and I know that some of them resent in varying degrees the affection that's lavished on TiddlyWiki 5 compared to TiddlyWiki-Classic. So one of the things that I would quite like to explore, if it's possible, as we consider these changes, is to try and make TiddlyWiki-Classic much more of a peer with TiddlyWiki 5. So one thing is that TiddlyWiki-Classic, as you know, is built with TiddlyWiki 5. So we should be able to use the same continuous integration techniques with it. We should be able to have it just, and it strikes me as being, as possibly, if they're in the same repo, TiddlyWiki 5 and TiddlyWiki-Classic, that it's more likely that some of the attention that TiddlyWiki 5 gets might rub off onto TiddlyWiki-Classic. And if they share the same build process, then again, we can be happy that TiddlyWiki-Classic is benefiting from innovations that we brought into TiddlyWiki 5. But that's, as I say, that's all what I was thinking before you raised the possibility of it being a new organization. But I can see the advantages of it, I guess. Yeah.
There is one question that now TiddlyWiki.com is hosted somewhere else. I think you did create.
Oh, so it's
because of the HTTPS.
It's still hosted on GitHub, but it's just got Cloudflare in front of it. So I should have made that clearer. I didn't do anything very clever at all. Cloudflare has a free level of service that lets you point your DNS at it, and then it just mirrors something else, and it seems to be quite happy to mirror GitHub pages.
Okay, yeah, because at the moment with the TiddlyWiki organization, we had one problem. I think that there is a CNAME. There is somewhere there's a CNAME file which if you create the subdirectory in the TiddlyWiki repository, you have to use classic.tiddlywiki.something.
Right. So let's be what the other way of putting it is that at the moment TiddlyWiki.com is comprised of two GitHub pages repos.
Yeah.
And
okay.
And I'm not sure that I'm necessarily suggesting that they should be combined, but I know in passing that they could be.
Yeah. I think we can do classic TiddlyWiki.com something. I think this can be done with Cloudflare so that you have I don't know a subdomain. But all the new stuff should be TiddlyWiki.com and then something, I don't know, static pages or languages or whatever.
Okay. Yeah. So, well, this brings me to the second point on the list, actually, which was I also propose that we move everything that's on TiddlyWiki.com to TiddlyWiki.org, and we make TiddlyWiki.com redirect to TiddlyWiki.org. And the reason for that is twofold. One good reason and one opportunistic reason. The good reason is that every so often we get people who are confused by the commercial status of TiddlyWiki because it is on a website, TiddlyWiki.com. Doesn't happen very often. And I think that's because most people who are tripped up by that don't bring it to our attention. Why would you? You'd have to be, you'd have to really care about it to bother to send an email to somebody to say, "Oi, why are you on TiddlyWiki.com and not TiddlyWiki.org?" And yet it happens steadily. Mario, maybe you've seen it every so often as well.
Not really, because in Europe we are used to .com being very first American companies, but now everything which is open source, or many open source projects have .io, which is completely, I don't know, I don't even know where it comes from.
We're not going to go there, but
TiddlyWiki processes input and output. Therefore,
yes, right.
Well, the reason why I think this is getting this is a good time to do this is because there is now, and this is partly me speaking for myself, but there is commercial activity around TiddlyWiki. And the second that happens, I think it's really good to draw the lines really clearly. And so if I'm going to, or me or anybody else are going to try and actively make money on TiddlyWiki services and so on, we should draw a very clear boundary around that which is open source and the property of the community. And of course, that's everything, because that's my philosophy in these matters. But so that was, if you like, the good reason. And I don't know, I'd certainly be interested if there are any arguments against it, but I could see why one might argue that it wasn't sufficiently important to make the change. But the secondary motivation for making the change is that it allows us to do a lift and shift. But basically, making big changes in open source projects is hard. Coordinating lots of individual changes. And with something like TiddlyWiki.com, there's been lots of discussion over the years about quite big, deep changes that we wouldn't be able to do overnight. And so I like the idea of setting up TiddlyWiki.org as a under construction version of TiddlyWiki.com, and we work on it for a little while, for a little while being 2 or 3 months perhaps. And then we have a launch event at which we flick a switch and switch to the new site. So that was, and so in terms of, therefore, in terms of classic.tiddlywiki.com and so on, I think we can and should take this as a clean slate. You can, I care about URL compatibility as much as backwards compatibility as much as anybody else, but we can comfort ourselves by saying this is arranging the website for the next 50 years. So if we're going to get it right for the next 50 years, that'll end up dwarfing the 7 years that it's been in this, in the current state that we're proposing to fix.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also think we have to take into account the technical possibilities that you get for free from, for example, GitHub. Because when we did the first version, you only had the possibility to have a special repository name, which was the main page. But now you have the main page, which is simply the docs directory. Which is much better, because when you did the how's it called, the subdomains, then you always had to have the GitHub or
a whole new organization.
The GitHub pages, GitHub pages branch, which is basically invisible on the web interface, and now you just have a directory which is called docs, and everyone can see the whole main page or the whole site in the docs directory, which is much better, I think. No,
I read about that, but I'd completely forgotten that they'd made that change. And yeah, you're right. The old GH pages branch
is a different branch.
Was horrible.
Because it basically it switches between two completely different things. The one is the page, and the other one is the project. And I think it was confusing. And now I think there is a much better workflow, and that's why I think it should be possible that we use TiddlyWiki organization.
Okay, so the next thing is to
before we move on completely, just one last remark I have on the GitHub changing. I guess we're still on this topic, actually.
We are, I was only going to get to another bit.
There's a substantial difference between with regard to TiddlyWiki-Classic and TiddlyWiki-5, there's a substantial difference between moving things to a new organization and putting them together in the same repository. There's also the possibility to put references to another repository inside a base repository.
We were just talking about a GitHub Pages repo. So not the absolutely not the what is currently the TiddlyWiki/TiddlyWiki repo and the the Germany/TiddlyWiki-5 repo. Those wouldn't merge. And as it happens, I'm not it may be that I should revisit it, but I've become distrustful of the complexity of repository links, whatever they're called, in GitLand.
Sub-repositories are definitely a bit arcane, so I'm not necessarily recommending those. I'm saying they are something you can do, but much more relevant is just the idea that, if you're making a new organization for TiddlyWiki maintenance, that organization can probably host both the TiddlyWiki-Classic and the TiddlyWiki-5 repositories.
I think where we are at the moment is it's the single existing TiddlyWiki organization that gets that we migrate the TiddlyWiki-5 repo to.
Okay, and that's currently the community that maintains TiddlyWiki-Classic.
The organization, but it's the same people. It's me and Eric and Mario. There is with the TiddlyWiki-Classic or the TiddlyWiki organization, there are some really old repositories. There is TiddlyFox, which is okay. Then there is TiddlyWiki, which is then TiddlyWiki-Classic. Then I made 2 or 3 test repositories, and the other stuff is a little bit older. So we need to clean or do some housekeeping there, and then we should be able to. I lost you for a second, Mario. So sorry. What was the housekeeping we need to do?
With TiddlyWiki organization, there are several really old repositories. So we really need to remove the stuff, or let's say archive the stuff that we don't need anymore. And then we can use the new build mechanism to create TiddlyWiki-Classic, or to build and deploy a TiddlyWiki-Classic. And the same mechanism should be valid for TiddlyWiki-5. And with the new organization that the documents directory, that the documents directory can be the homepage. I think it should be possible to have everything in one organization. Yeah.
Okay, but I don't. For us, that's not an advantage because we've got two repos at the moment. One is the source, and one is what is produced when you execute that source. And so putting it in the same repo, the trouble I have with that is that means that when we commit the built version of things, we'll be adding a new commit to the source repo, and that feels wrong. It feels like the build products should be in a different repo than the thing that we're building, because then
this is possible too. Yeah, this is possible too. So if we say if we say that the stuff that should be built should be TiddlyWiki.org, then we can push it to TiddlyWiki.org.
Yeah.
So that then this is the whole build stuff, and the source is TiddlyWiki. There should be no problem.
I know in the past we've talked about splitting the TiddlyWiki 5 repos so that plugins such as languages get their own repos. I would rather that we considered these things in stages, and as a first step, automated the build of what we've got, and then considered any repo changes. And I mean, as it happens, you know.
So, did we lose you, Jeremy? Did I lose everyone?
No, I can't. Yeah, I think Jeremy got lost.
Oops, that's unfortunate. Let's see if he comes back.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe I can have a quick screen share so that you can see this, how it looks like. So can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. And now I'm switching back to my account, and there are several. There is TiddlySpace, which is old and outdated because TiddlySpace is closed. Then there is the TiddlyWiki organization, and then there is TiddlyWiki-Classic, and this is mine. And if I switch to TiddlyWiki, then there are several repositories at the moment. Can you see them? So it's TiddlyWiki.com, TiddlyWiki, TiddlyFox, and so on.
Okay, and a PHP software, cooker, poster, all that.
Yes, right. And this is the really old build stuff, because this was done with PHP programs. Yeah, there was a cooking mechanism, and so on. This one, editions German and languages, I did create for testing purpose. But the cooker and the poster, they should be really archived somewhere. Because they are only confusing. Also, the PHP server stuff is confusing. Then there is some better stuff, I think, which is still active. And there are the old translations, which look completely different. Because the old translations have been like hard-coded JS files. Where I really did overwrite the different configurations. It worked quite well, but this was like monkey patching the stuff. But this should stay there, because we still need it, if we build TiddlyWiki Classic. But TiddlyFox probably should go to different. Okay, we archive it, because it doesn't work anymore with the latest browsers. But this PHP stuff should be gone. This one I think I can delete without any problems, and the language stuff is just a proof of concept. That's the one that I mentioned in the at the groups, which I did 2 years ago.
So the TiddlyWiki.com repository is used mainly just as an interface to GitHub hosting, right?
Yes, right.
Not for any kind of ordinary version control per se.
In this case, so this TiddlyWiki.com, it has a CNAME. There should be somewhere. Or is it? Where is it? I don't know exactly where it is, but there somewhere there is a CNAME setting. This one, TiddlyWiki.com, and this one points to classic.tiddlywiki.com, and exactly this setting causes the problem that everything that you do with this organization, because it points to http://tiddlywiki.com, you have to classic.tiddlywiki.com languages, for example. But languages is TiddlyWiki 5. So it has classic.tiddlywiki.com languages, and this is completely wrong. Yeah. So that's the main problem, and if we can fix this one, yeah, then now with the new structure that GitHub lets us have is should be possible, yeah, to reuse this organization. And with organizations, we can have different users or different people that have different rights. Yeah? And at the moment, the whole build stuff is done with Jeremy's private repository. So he cannot grant rights or write access to his private stuff.
Yeah.
And that's the main problem at the moment.
It makes Jeremy into a bottleneck.
Yes, right. Yes, that's exactly the point. Yeah. So we should clone not only the repository but also Jeremy. So.
Yeah. Oh, he was just saying we should clone not only the repository but also Jeremy. So that Jeremy.
No, this is I took a couple of weeks off at Christmas and realized that I need to focus on these things. A few initiatives that make it easier for other people to help out, and that's absolutely the motivation of all of these moves.
Yeah. And I have to say I'm really motivated to create stuff like this because I have seen it with the file backups plugin. If you use the automatic build stuff, it really does everything. It signs it, it creates the homepage, and it copies the different files.
And the way that Travis works, our build process can be TiddlyWiki, so we can do anything that TiddlyWiki can do in the build process. Can't we?
Yes, right. And this is really easy. So you just do an npm install TiddlyWiki. And then you can use TiddlyWiki to build the whole stuff. Yeah? You can use TiddlyWiki to create static files, which I explained with the language proof of concept, and yeah, I think. And then also, if the community sees that it is relatively easy to do this stuff, because if they create the pull request, then Travis should take over, create a pre-release version, or I don't know how we call it, or a test version, and then Travis publishes a link, for example, to Gitter, which is a chat program, and then you click it, and then you open it, and everyone can do the review stuff, and then it's really easy. Yeah. So also for our contributors, because I think we had 2 contributors in the last 6 months that they had great ideas, but they couldn't get their stuff going, and we may have lost them.
Absolutely, yeah. It's really scary, that stuff. And worth tying together with the stuff that Andreas is talking about, that we should also be running our test suite automatically. Not the performance tests that I guess we're going to be talking about shortly, but the functional tests.
Yeah, the functional tests, and we should also improve the functional tests a little bit. I think there is the most basic stuff, so that the widget tree and the path tree and all this stuff is generated in the right way, so that TiddlyWiki really can handle the stuff. But then, that's basically it. There is some big common JS test, but that's it.
As I understand it, one of the things that other projects do is require test coverage before a PR will be flagged for consideration.
Yeah, okay, this is also two-sided.
I don't think we should do that immediately, but I like the idea, though, that we've got a case in point with Evan's work. That I like the idea that if we're doing really tricky, high-risk things that we build.
Oh yeah, no, the stuff I want to do would have a very high risk of making TiddlyWiki not refresh, right?
And I love it. I think as you made an emotional point about what it feels like, Mario, and I think I'm really hoping that we'll get that as a project, that we'll all feel more secure in making proposals and changes when we've got this infrastructure.
Yes, right, exactly. Yeah, because also, as I saw in other projects, if there is a good test suite or good test coverage, you can use the test code to see how the library is supposed to work. Yeah, and I think this is for beginners. If you really read the test suite and you run it and you play with it, then you get the knowledge how the library actually works. Yeah? With TiddlyWiki, we have a second dimension, which is the UI stuff that the users can change. Yeah? And then the interaction that is done, and there are almost no good test suites that can deal with that. So that's all the stuff that Evan probably needs. So, but also the browsers make advanced development. So with Chrome we have the headless, with Firefox we have a headless version, and there is the remote debugging API.
Yeah,
there
are a few people who donate those headless browser test rigs to open source projects, and we may well be able to get access to one.
Yes, but yeah, the main point would be that if we first we have to create some stuff that we can really test the UI. I had some ideas, but I didn't play with them because I was creating a test, or let's say change the core so that the reveal widget creates a little bit less DOM elements. Yeah, because it creates, I don't know, about 60 to 75%. DOM elements that are hidden. So it creates them and then it hides them. So instead of...
You know why? It does, because the purpose of the reveal widget is so that you can have animated reveals. So it has to create DOM elements.
Not all of them. Yeah,
well, I mean, then it becomes something else, which I think generally looks a lot like the list widget.
Yeah.
Well, that was anyway, a big part of my motivation in creating.
If we have good tests, and the tests can take this, and then the users can play with it, then we can see, okay, is there an advantage or even a disadvantage? But at the moment we don't have tests, so we can't test it.
Yeah, no, take your point.
Let
me. Oh, sorry. Let me just open this up again before I bring in a couple of new points I wanted to raise that are relevant here. Is there anything else that anybody waiting to say something is what I'm trying to ask?
No, not me.
I will remark. I think that, especially if there are efforts to kind of improve the structure in a way that helps new developers to get started. I think there is more work to be done on developer documentation. It's clear that somebody put in a lot of effort and kind of left off a while ago. I had to do a lot of I had to invest a lot of time and intention and attention to get to a point where I understood like how to write a widget. Just because the documentation.
I think the theme here is, how can we make it possible for people other than Jeremy to fix this?
If only we were well versed in some kind of software that was really well suited to writing technical documentation. If only we had a really good wiki to work on.
I was just going to throw in that while we're talking about this stuff, in terms of the big changes for the project, so we've got to really keep in mind here that there's, of all the things that we discussed, there's big prize from the organizational move, big prize from doing the automated builds and tests and so on. But we must keep our eye on the kind of return on investment, because there are other things that I think we need to do. So the two that are really obvious, and they get raised all the time, is a plugin library that makes it possible for people to publish their own plugins to their own schedule, and for them to be directly installed by end users. And the second thing is a way for people to more easily update the documentation.
Yes.
So I've got two specific proposals for how we make those be manageable. What I'm propose is that we actually worry about the documentation contributions first, because of the two, the documentation. If there was a way for Evan, when he publishes a new version of the formula plugin, to make an update appear on TiddlyWiki.com, that would go a long way towards solving the problem of the discoverability of Evan's plugins. Obviously, getting Evan's stuff into the centralized plugin library or whatever it is would be even better. But I'm just trying to argue why, of those two tasks, why I think making it easy for people to update the documentation takes priority over the plugin library. And in terms of the documentation, I've suggested elsewhere that we face a huge problem, that people think it is easy to contribute to the documentation. And many times we see it because it's trivial to find a part of the documentation that's terrible. And we've had many contributions to try and improve some of those things. But a challenge that we see all the time is the people making those contributions don't understand the overall structure of the documentation, and they don't understand the standards and conventions that the documentation is trying to stick to. Yes. And so therefore those standards, such as they are, drift, and then a lot of the time they might as well not be there. So I think the challenge there is that updating a complex interlinked reference work like TiddlyWiki's technical documentation is a very complicated task that requires commitment and investment to understand what's going on in that body of work so that you can make meaningful modifications to it. And that everybody always talks as if the challenge is GitHub. I don't think it is, because the people who make it through the challenge in GitHub, a large number of documentation contributions are either poor in the sense that I just described, that they don't match up with the rest of the documentation, or they're poor in that they're an answer to a very specific question that somebody had once upon a time, and so they've contributed a tiddler that is essentially an answer to that very specific question, instead of doing the kind of quite difficult work to try and pull it back to being a general point of advice that's applicable to as many people as possible. Yes. So arguing that all of that is why reference documentation is hard. So therefore, I want to suggest that we create a completely different channel of documentation, that we shouldn't even use the word documentation. Let's call it sharing, which is about one-shot sharing. So as in sharing snippets of information that are not interrelated, because that's easier. Evan,
it's like a cookbook.
Like a
cookbook.
It could be like, or I was thinking of tips as being the thing that people would submit a tip, and a tip might be, "Oi, there's a plugin over there you might like." It might be, if you're having trouble with your double curly braces, then try washing them in lavender water, and that we would have a stream of incoming tips, and that we would ultimately like anybody to be able to contribute a tip. I believe that we cannot allow unmoderated tips to appear on TiddlyWiki.com, so I think we need a team of editors. So this is coming slowly to the new proposal, which was that we once we've got the automated build process, as you may know, as part of my work at ZemiMex, I now have a workable multi-user TiddlyWiki in the cloud, and there are other ways of achieving that, but as it happens, that's what I've got, and it's working quite well, and it's been working for a while. So I could now create a wiki that would be private to the editing would be private to the nominated editors, and then we could make, couldn't we, Mario, the build process, pull in the tip content from there, just as we used to do. Or we could make my end, the ZemiMex end, send a stream of commits across to a tips repo on TiddlyWiki.
Okay, this would be possible too, yeah.
And then my idea is that to handle end user submissions, that we would use a Google form. So we'd use a Google form, and plenty of my friends use Google Forms all the time. And for this kind of thing, I think it's a top top approach. So we create a Google form that adds to a spreadsheet. It notifies the editors. They're then responsible for updating a wiki that they have access to that has all of the tips in it. So they can go back and edit old tips, and they can add new tips. And I was thinking that a smallish team of 3-4 editors might be sufficient. But it's obviously, it's a big responsibility. I think it would be, if we get the automatic build stuff in place, it'll be really satisfying, because those people will be the gatekeepers to, you know, Evan, I think you've recently, I hope, it looked like from a distance, had this fantastic experience that you launch a plugin, make a post on the group, you get a phenomenal response that then drives your continued, you know, that feedback cycle is really cool. And this is really about trying to pave that path, if you see what I mean. So it's a bit easier for everybody. So there's nothing particularly to discuss here, because the first stage is what we discussed already, is to get the automated build process up and running. And the sort of organizational point of trying to clearly describe the task so that the people who volunteer to be editors can understand you know, what we're aiming to do.
And I also think the contribution, let's say, guideline is not that complicated. For example, we may have 5 editors. Then if someone says, okay, there is a new tip, one editor checks it in. And then if there is, I don't know, a second or a third editor says, that's okay, then the build process should be able to get this information, and then automatically distributes or publishes the stuff which has been signed off 2 times or 3 times.
I would be very happy for it only to be signed off by the editors. In fact,
yes, but if we have 5 editors, 3 of them have to say that's okay.
Okay, we can.
If you only have 3 editors, then maybe we only need 2. Because I want to have a little bit of review cycle. So that the editors can improve the stuff a little bit. So if only one editor says that's okay, that shouldn't be enough.
Well, I think
if there is only
you're
one
probably
editor,
right.
Yes.
Yeah. And certainly, I'm imagining a team. I think it has to be to work.
So here's an interesting question: is there like a good, and this is something that could make the editing process a lot more manageable. Is there a good quick workflow for visualizing essentially the diff of an individual tiddler that's been edited?
There isn't at the moment. It's something I'm often on the cusp of adding, actually. But I'm imagining that this to be, so to be really clear, what would be in here would be the things that are in the community tiddler on the homepage. With a slightly expanded list of categories. So it would be, I would imagine, almost always adding new ones, almost never editing them.
Yeah. For the diff, I do have a plugin that I created for the Picker browser. It's not published because it has a very special purpose there. But it uses the standard library from Google, so the diff match patch library. And there is some
we really need it in the core. I mean, I'd love to. The thing that prompts me always is in the edit preview window, I'd like to be able to see a diff with the current value of the tiddler, but also in the import window. And both of those, you know, if you had a widget that did it, very easy to plumb them in. Very simple.
I do have a plugin, but I also used the patch version there, so which made it possible to create patches and only transfer patches.
Okay, yeah, that's nice.
So,
honest, I've mentioned this stuff before, but if there was a diff patch library just sitting in the TiddlyWiki core somewhere I could include it, I've already had thoughts about other neat
Yeah.
extensions I could build just off that functionality, and it does seem like a very natural fit.
Yes,
Yeah.
for a developer.
I think it's.
I mean,
it's
the
great.
thing I had in mind was a way was a plugin that would allow basically a mod loader plugin.
Oh yeah, I remember you talking about that. Yeah, but I'm interested in
hey,
it from a.
if it was third party, you wouldn't have to support it.
No, it's great. I'm sorry. Yes, I certainly didn't mean to sound uninterested.
Yeah. No. I very much respect your reservations about it. At the same time, I think that just facilitating core mods as a as something that can happen outside of a Git repository potentially.
I think it's one of these things where there's a bunch of experiments that I'm really interested in, such as experimenting with different packages of the core that have different combinations of tiddlers in them. That one's come up repeatedly, and I don't think anybody's taken up my invitation to experiment there, but I think those are very interesting areas, and the great thing is, they can be experimented on outside of the core, I think, anyway.
Yeah. I was experimenting with the core version that only had German text with it. But this is relatively easier. I did it with a hard link. Yeah. So switched out the English version, and then the English version could be a plugin. Yeah, because it's a little bit of size that you save. Where I always say, okay, if someone includes one image, then all the advantages that we do with the core are gone. Yeah. So, but that was an experiment. So switching out the English language. The problem then is that if the core develops and needs a new text, then you first have to have the German version, and then the English version as a fallback. So having the English version or any version as a fallback, which has all the texts, is worth having. Yeah. So because if not everything is translated, then you at least get an English text instead of no text at all. So that's why this was just an experiment, but the thing is probably the same. Yeah. So we would need some different build.
I think we've kind of maybe coming to the end of this first section, which is all these project hygiene things. Is there any other thoughts or topics in that kind of area?
No, I just wanted to say, then I will start to modify the TiddlyWiki organization without deleting something, just changing or probably adding stuff, and have a look if I can get Travis to build the stuff. So first, and then have a closer look about the how can we organize the language, not the language, the documentation stuff.
Okay, well, the documentation stuff is say that let's we need to do lift and shift first, and then because in terms of the documentation, the other thing I want to do, I've mentioned elsewhere, is to do a lift and shift of the reference documents into a plugin so that they are easy for people to include in their own wikis, which has some implications. It means that the reference documentation will have to use system tiddlers as the titles of its tiddlers. So it would have to be engineered with some kind of viewer that lets you see the documentation without having to see these long titles that on the face of it we'd have to have if we anyway. So there's some issues in there, but the key thing is, again, this idea of doing a greenfield lift and shift. So we'll start with a blank reference documentation thing. We'll move things in bit by bit. Anything that's left over will go into this new tips wiki with its links and tips and so on. Awesome. And of course, great.
Yeah, there is one thing I wanted to say. As you said, that plugins should be also easier to handle. I had a look at Tobias Beer's plugin structure, and then I had a look at mine, and they are completely different. So the repositories they have yeah, they're 180%, 180-degree different. But the result is just, let's say, a JSON file which contains all the plugins, and then the TiddlyWiki loader should be able just to have different sources of plugins. So we can publish something like a best practice, how to, but the end result, how the structure of the different authors, it has to be completely open, because I don't want it to change, or I don't want my structure to look like Tobias, and I think it's vice versa.
I was imagining the plugin library being the main audience of the plugin library. If we're going to do a plugin library, to make it extend to the use case of a person sat with a TiddlyWiki on TiddlySpot who's created a one-line tiddler that they want to share. And I would like, at least conceptually, them to be able to share that as a plugin directly from their wiki.
Okay.
And I think it's quite key to because the people who are on GitHub, they can already publish plugins.
Yes, right.
So
okay. Yeah.
What we do is polish things for the technical people. We won't really have, you know, and the opportunity is to make it, as I say, so that any, and of course, once you frame it as sharing anything from my wiki into a library, then it doesn't even need to be, you know, a plugin, a functionality plugin in the same way. So I was thinking that that implies that the plugin library's kind of ultimate form would be an API. And yeah, that obviously has a bunch of implications in terms of how it's built, and some integration stuff with that API being possible. So maybe that in the future, if one wished to publish a plugin from GitHub, that one might start with a repo that incorporates continuous integration stuff to basically push updated versions of the plugins to the plugin library when they're built. And so the reason for suggesting it that way, as in conceiving of the plugin library as being an API, is that I think that that's the most flexible way of thinking about it that will cover all of the use cases that we're interested in, and we can plug into GitHub and so on and so forth.
Yeah, okay. But yeah, then I have a little bit of security concerns. I personally wouldn't install a plugin from TiddlySpot without, let's say, if it's too easy. Yeah, at the moment, I have a look at the code and I see what's going on, and then I copy paste it. But if there is a workflow which has,
so I think a couple of thoughts there. One of them is I think we would require HTTPS only as a matter of hygiene. So TiddlySpot sadly would be out unless it gets upgraded. But the other thing is for the, you know, we've got this problem anyway with the plugin library, that it's we need to give people as many mechanisms to convey and understand trust as possible.
Yes.
Because there's no, we can never, a TiddlyWiki plugin library, I mean, TiddlyWiki plugins wouldn't be any use unless they were so complicated that you needed to trust them. So the kind of thing, again, it would be nice to see in the plugin library, very standard stuff, is a way for me, well, for me as a user of the plugin library about to download a plugin, to be able to see who else has downloaded it, or sorry, who else has left a review of it, how many people have downloaded it, how many people are running it. And obviously, there's all of our normal issues that some of those statistics we can't gather. But and we may, I'm still interested in the sort of social, what's the word, social phenomena that you get with plugins, that we've got a lot of abandoned plugins in the TiddlyWiki 5. And so that's actually a big motivation for having a library to which you push stuff, is that that kind of library tolerates abandonment much, much better than a distributed library. Anyway, look, we should pull away from these topics, I think, because Evan is very patiently asked to discuss one thing and then sat through an hour and 10 minutes of discussing a whole bunch of other stuff.
I do think it's valuable talking about ways of making this pipeline this pipeline for contributions better, because I've certainly, like, again, I had to put in kind of a large upfront investment of time and energy to well, at least to learn how to make the plugin. Admittedly, I haven't gotten to the point of putting it into any central TiddlyWiki repository yet. And it's basically the people on the Google groups and the people who come across other places that's linked that can discover it right now. But you know, I'm also making it more stable over time. Anyway, so topics I've been interested in discussing and have loudly discussed a bit are making TiddlyWiki's refresh mechanism and possibly other related mechanisms more efficient, so that more complex interactive applications can be built in TiddlyWiki and can work better up in complexity. It's my observation that, and I'm going to share my screen here. It's my observation that there are some substantial fixed costs involved in refreshing TiddlyWiki. Just to give a particularly horrifying example of this, I've with my timer plugin and my formula plugin, I actually implemented a simple simulation in TiddlyWiki, which is a very unusual thing to do. And I'm not saying necessarily that we need to all become concerned with TiddlyWiki working well for simulations. But this is actually a very effective demonstration of how TiddlyWiki's refresh costs, its base refresh costs, can prove quite substantial when there's some state in the wiki changing on a very regular interval. So this is a little SVG rendering of a bouncing ball, and basically what this is it's the timer widget I built as another plugin, calling a set of action widgets at regular intervals, and my formula plugin does some calculations to figure out the ball's updated velocity and position. So there's fairly little computation going on here, and the SVG rendering is also fairly cheap for what it is. But this is constrained to update on this machine about I guess I can get it up to about 20 times a second with some instability. And as a wiki scales up, though, the thing is, most of the cost of updating the position of this ball visually is in completely unrelated tasks, like going through the entire wiki and checking the tag of every tiddler. I actually have a profile tap up. There's something else delightful. I found that buttons.
Yeah, I've seen this too.
Everything slows down when you're screen sharing. So. Yeah.
But if we look at the profile graph, basically, we can actually see that in the 4,000 milliseconds spent doing an earlier simulation, a very substantial part of that time is spent on this exports.hasTag function, which is checking throughout the wiki which tiddlers are tagged with what. Another very substantial use of time is in just rerunning filters that are displaying on the page, each shadow plus tiddlers. I can avert the filter cost if I've hidden these elements over here, but I guess just thinking about the refresh mechanism, it's my position that in the long run, almost all of this computation can be gotten rid of, because the only thing that can possibly change in a filter result or a tagging result is that one tiddler, the state tiddler for this simulation, that has been changed. So, and in this case, I just have a tiddler with a couple of fields. That's what's getting updated. But it's the nature of TiddlyWiki's refresh mechanism right now that it's obligatory for a lot of computations, filters especially, to be executed again on even the smallest change to the tiddler store. And it's also, I believe some caches get thrown out as well, though that's not a mechanism I understand quite as well. So on that note,
yeah,
yes, absolutely.
So sorry, can I just ask a couple of questions and make a couple of points? First, though, was that 20 frames a second is way better than I would ever have expected. Are you running under a new iMac Pro or something amazing?
No, it is a MacBook Pro, but it's a few years old and it was a refurb, and it is actually a very good frame rate.
It's a theme that just for a second that has hit me over and over again, particularly in the last 2 years, is trying things out in the browser that I wouldn't normally even bother to try because I'd expect them to be terrible, and then discovering that they're quite workable. And your simulation is an awesome example. And yeah, seeing that is the best possible case that you could make for all of the work that you're doing, I think, because that stuff absolutely should work. And the fact that it's so tantalizingly close to being practical means, yeah, I'm absolutely with you. And we've also, I've been running the performance analysis tools like you and drawing some similar conclusions. The tag stuff is interesting, isn't it? Because there's a few different ways that one could make that faster. One of the things that I've noticed as well is the ridiculous low-hanging fruit there has been in terms of making substantial speed improvements to the refresh cycle by making really low-level optimizations. And the kind of thing I'm talking about is I recently changed things to not use object keys so much because it's slow, and there was an earlier optimization to, so these are all very, what's interesting to me about them is that those were a class of very generic JavaScript optimizations that can be applied to a lot of different code. And indeed, that was in many cases how I found them, was because there's quite good research on those kinds of tricks. But the tags one.
But there is also a very big difference between WebKit-based stuff and now Firefox, so Gecko-based.
Gecko's slow.
No. They are not slow anymore. They are really fast. But they are very, let's say, they are very different. I found out when I do some profiling with Firefox, then I look at some different functions than with now Chrome or Chromium. So and
well, that's good to keep an eye on. I must say, I tend to profile in Safari and Chrome because they have the best dev tools, and I kind of hate Firefox dev tools. But maybe we should be looking at Firefox too.
Yeah, they are different.
And just something I want to clarify on this whole theme of optimization. The stuff that I am primarily concerned with is less in the level of like JavaScript code style optimization.
I was starting to kind of just draw out a bit of a I think we can categorize these optimizations. My reason for noting the low-level JavaScript stuff is because I've been stunned by the return on that investment, and so that's made me think, just as a working theory, that there is always more fruit on that tree every time I look. The second thing, of course, is to consider things like the tagging stuff is interesting, because that's nothing to do with refreshing. It's nothing to do with filters. It's its own mechanism within the store. So it's a class of performance issues that could be fixed, for instance, by adopting a radically different store, one that did indexing. And I think that's a big question, has always been a big question for me, that other people have done considerable research in doing fast, performant, pure JavaScript stores, and the Tiddler store that we've got at the moment is, is the simplest thing that could possibly work, and sometimes it doesn't work well. And I think we've got quite a good understanding of the workload of the core. So then, of course, there's the category that Evan's in, which is the most complicated category, because it's all interlinked with the most complicated logic in TiddlyWiki of these of the filters and refresh mechanisms. So I guess one of the things that I'm just making me think again, Evan, when we're talking about optimizations, we continually were up against this tension between the complexity and impact of an optimization on the current code base versus how simple we think it might be if we were on a clean sheet TWX environment. And I guess all of this is just helping me to get a better idea for the risks here. Sorry, Evan, continue.
Oh, and just one other demonstration I want to do. If I have the infamous recent tab open, the frame rate of this little demonstration drops to about 5.
Yeah.
Even though it's just updating that one tiddler, this very complicated filter construct needs to be reevaluated.
Yeah. I know what I was going to say is that right back in, annoyingly, when TiddlyWiki 5 started, I made the mistake that everybody always does, of premature optimization. And I had elaborate mechanisms for keeping track of the dependencies. So basically, when you transcluded something, you knew under what conditions you would need to update that entire thing that you'd transcluded. And so it part of the motivation was, and one of the things that it worked quite well for, was the refresh, was the recent tab, of course. But you could also imagine us writing for the particular case of the recent tab, sorry, the timeline. You can imagine us writing a bit of a hack, a widget that explicitly only passed on the refresh cycles under certain conditions, if that makes sense. And so it could then completely avoid, because a widget that was the parent of transcluding the timeline would be in complete control of the refreshing of that branch.
So, okay, just because we're kind of in this, on this particular topic right now, I've thought about the implications of applying selective refresh logic to filters somehow. And while it does seem, it would obviously be a huge amount of work if every filter operator had to be expanded to multiple methods where it manages both an original calculation and a selective refresh based on which tiddlers have changed. But I think that can actually be simplified a lot by accounting for some of the very basic cases involved in refresh, which is that you have constructors. Apologies, I've got to shut off an alarm over here. You have selection constructors, and oh boy, that's annoying. That's my don't sleep in alarm. You have selection constructors and you have filters that go through the tiddlers in a list to check on them, and to filter some of them out. You also have a few other categories like string operators, a lot of which work element wise. And it's my observation that the really big fixed costs seem to be in these selection constructors, which involve going through, again, every tiddler in the wiki. And often by the second or third step in a filter, the set of items being filtered have pared down significantly. That said, I definitely look at this concept of selectively refreshed filters as one of the most kind of work-intensive optimization tasks that could be pursued. At the same time, it seems like one that has a great potential to make TiddlyWiki just more efficient across the board by making it do a lot less work when lots of things are open. That said, the stuff I've been looking at.
Did you find the solution already, or
a solution?
Did you do you have a hack which changes the behavior?
No, honestly, if I was going to look into implementing selective refresh on filter operators, it's probably something that I would want to have a design conversation about. There are a couple of other optimizations I want to talk about, although it's yeah.
I also see the set attribute NS. Yeah, I found this one already. Yeah, also.
Which one?
The which really sets the DOM attribute.
Oh yeah, so set attributes. So certain tiddlers I have, and the one I'll provide as an example here. I'm still screen sharing, I believe, right?
Yes.
Turn off. Whatever. I'll just close you.
Yeah.
Got more work to do on that timer widget. But basically, if you're updating a lot of attribute values, as is the case in my harmonic lattice demo,
yeah.
The thing is, when you're refreshing element widgets, they will rewrite all of their attribute values, even the ones that haven't changed.
Yeah, right.
And I think this is browser dependent, but the cost is quite substantial. I can actually get a profile tap of this as well. And you'll see that set attribute NS, it's a really easy optimization too, is the nice thing. This is a low-hanging fruit optimization that can be implemented in just only with changes to the element widget. And as you'll see here, for certain use cases, it can save a lot of performance. And the reason for this is whenever you change an attribute on the DOM, it will dispatch mutator observer events to things that have registered for that purpose.
Is that an easy optimization? I mean, can we just check?
It is. Like that's something any of us could write as a pull request.
Excellent. Okay.
So in this case, the total expense of all the work done was 8,009 milliseconds. Set attribute NS accounts for about 510 of that, actually, which isn't as high as I've seen before. A lot of it is still this exports hashtag. Actually, part of that might be because I had the reveal widget up still, but
in this area of the interactions with the DOM that I've wondered before is whether we should look at using an off-the-shelf virtual DOM library. They didn't exist when TiddlyWiki 5 started, but that's obviously kind of what it's trying to do. And I've only glanced at them over the years, but it is possible that they already embody a lot of the logic that we might want.
Yeah. Yeah, you also made a very let's say basic fake DOM.
Yeah.
But I tried this one, but it's there is no win in it.
Well, the fake DOM is used all the time as an essential.
Yes, but for the test that I made for setting attributes to the real DOM.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
There is almost no win.
No, right.
What I found out is that we have a lot of attributes that don't need to be set.
Okay.
And yeah, this was one of my experiments. So I think we can get rid of I don't know, about 30–40% of the attributes that we don't need to set, because we can't use them anyway. Most of them are class assignments, which are there for very, very many different elements, so they cannot be used for styling. They are just there. They make debugging a little bit easier, because you see what's going on. But I think they are wasting some time in, let's say, for the browser. Really, the browser work.
Well, okay, but I mean, if they weren't costing time during a refresh, if they were only costing time during setup, that might be worth it. I mean, there's many other places where we balance debuggability above performance.
Yeah, this is one of the tests we have to do. So it needs some tests that we really can prove if it's an improvement.
Yeah. So
can I pause for a second?
I actually have the code up here for reference, but the element widget, when it detects its attributes have changed, it calls this.assign attributes. And in widget, if we look at the assign attributes function, it reassigns all of the attributes. It's not selective. So there are potentially quite a lot more calls to set attributes in S than is necessary.
Yeah.
Yes, right.
And additionally,
low-hanging fruit, well worth doing. Can I pause for a second just to introduce? I can see that we've been joined by Abraham. I believe this is Abraham Sama, who has posted to the group and who I've seen on Twitter. But Abraham, welcome. I don't think you've been on a Hangout before, so welcome to the Hangout.
Hello, thank you. Can you hear me?
We can. You're coming over loud and clear.
Okay.
When people join the Hangout, we normally I ask them to introduce themselves, say where they're from, and say something about what they're doing with TiddlyWiki. And Abraham would certainly like to extend that invitation to you if you can, in that way.
Thank you. I decided to keep quiet for a few minutes because I didn't want to be a bother. Seeing the adults were discussing a lot of important things. I'm actually a very I could classify myself as an beginner intermediate JavaScript developer, and TiddlyWiki was kind of a good way of flexing my thinking muscle, so to speak, with regards to interacting it, building on top of it. I've had a great time building. I've had a great time building my own public-facing application. If you've heard of it, MarfaPad. It's kind of a way of it's kind of a way of managing a personal library of TiddlyWikis. I don't know whether a lot of people find it useful, but I find it useful because it kind of gives me access, instant access to all of my TiddlyWikis on the internet, which I find extremely useful. And I'm continuing to build on it, and I'm kind of I'm more interested in performance aspects when it comes to TiddlyWiki's core. So what Mr. Evans, I believe, was discussing was quite interesting. Although I don't have much to share in terms of experiments and whatnot.
Well, Abraham, I certainly have heard of MarfaPad, if that's the right way to pronounce it. I would encourage you to make a post to the discussion group because I've seen you sharing thoughts with Twitter, but it would be really great to get a kind of clearer idea of both what you've done, which sounds really impressive and interesting, and get an idea of your plans and your vision for the future as well.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm making a point of making my presence felt on the group.
It can feel embarrassing to introduce yourself, but I think you've already made some achievements that means that you have no need to be embarrassed, and I'm sure you'll get a warm welcome. But Evan, let's come back to the discussion that we're having before. I'd like to just pull back to a point I raised before, which was about trying to this is a really exciting area, and so there's not danger flags, but we've got to be focused to make sure that we get a good return on the investment. We've got to make sure that we fulfill the potential of what you've discovered so far, and made it clear. I think these are, I don't know, if we managed to make the refresh cycle in the example you showed us, if we managed to make it 10 times faster,
then it's as fast as it would ever need to be.
Yeah.
So
that'd change a lot.
So just a few more general thoughts I'd like to share. I can do this simulation, and it's cool. It's a bit of a weird thing to write in TiddlyWiki. It's cool if it's possible, but things that I have a much more direct experience with that predicate on the sort of high frame rate are if I'm typing quickly into the search bar or another edit field in the wiki, that's also initiating tiddler store change for each keystroke. And the thing is, the wiki feels less responsive if that's slower. And I've shown you already how that can slow down to 5 frames per second or less in that wiki if I have the recent tab open. And I have wikis that have 10 times as much content as my formula wiki, where I potentially have to be quite careful about what's open when something's being changed. Just my general interest in the refresh mechanism is that there is a lot of room to keep improving TiddlyWiki's scalability. And on that note, there are a couple of other measures, some of which I've discussed before, but which I want to review now. It's a little funny diving. Part of the reason I was hesitant to dive right into the topic of selectively refreshing filters is in my mind, it's one of the deepest levels of this whole effort. Other items I've talked about are adding variables to selective refresh. Variables are simple enough. If a variable changes in the widget tree currently, it forces all child widgets to be completely destroyed, rebuilt, and re-rendered. But in practice, if you skip that step of destroying, rebuilding, and re-rendering, most uses of variables and macros still work, except for those placed directly in wiki text where the variable or macro being invoked has changed. So, and that's the case if you don't change any of TiddlyWiki's built-in variables. Anyway, suffice it to say, I've identified a way that to make changing variables a lot cheaper in terms of what widgets need to get recreated without even going so far as redesigning the current refresh mechanism. Which is basically, if you don't change any of these variables, then your changes won't affect any built-in widgets. The way I got this information is I made this formula construct that actually goes through, looks at every implemented function in every widget implementation, and looks at where they call get variable and set variable. And I found that there's only kind of a small focused set of variables that are used in this capacity. So basically, if you made it so that those widgets that can set non-system variables don't initiate a full rebuild when they set one, and if you made the macro call widget, double check that the macro that's being invoked has not changed when it's being refreshed, you could potentially save a lot of performance without breaking compatibility with existing things.
Yeah, no,
so
that's great. Have you seen BJ's?
That's another relatively cheap optimization.
BJ made a kind of related thing, which was as I recall, he made it so that filters didn't refresh, that the list widget would only compute the filter the first time around, and then it would just always use the same list results thereafter. And he was using it on wikis that were finished, if you see what I mean, at which point, of course, it works just great. And I loved it because it's a beautiful optimization, really simple to understand and, simple to do, I guess. And kind of lets you see what you stand to win, if you see what I mean. It was really, really startling. So yes, I love what you're doing there. Very interesting.
So that is an optimization that could be done without disrupting TiddlyWiki's architecture much. Taking it one step further, you could potentially add the set of variables that have changed in a refresh to the arguments for the refresh method in widget. At which point you wouldn't need to have special handling for system and non-system variables. And
yes,
basically,
I think it's at that point that I'd be questioning whether it would be worth transitioning variables to be tiddlers, with that widgets, tiddler store thing, because a lot of that stuff could be done, I think, in a backwards compatible way for wiki text, and yeah, it kind of feels, knowing as I now feel that variables in their present form were a mistake, kind of putting effort into optimizing them, although I can see it's absolutely critical from the point of view of improving performance, just feels like not the kind of effort one would like to expend, because but no, great. I think we're seeing things clearly here.
Yeah, I mean, I take concern with this because variables are currently an absolutely indispensable necessity in building any kind of complicated construct. And I showed last time around a number of the things I had made. Actually,
the issue is that we don't want to have two duplicate mechanisms. So if we're going to start,
and what you're talking about with the redesign of the tiddler store mechanism would be making it almost identical to variables. I guess if there was a concept of a tiddler store that was derived data rather than source data, then basically variables are simply tiddlers that exist as derived data.
And of all the things that we have talked about, that transition seems like it might be quite an interesting choice as an intermediate pull request, i.e. by no means straightforward. It would be
You mean the implementation of those stacked tiddler stores? To be honest, I would love to see that feature developed in the context of TiddlyWiki 5. I got the read from you before that might be an idea that you were keeping in your back pocket for TiddlyWiki X, but I think it could be incredibly useful and implementable.
The purpose, to be clear, kind of one of the reasons why it is okay, I think, now to discuss TiddlyWiki 10 is that is the possibility that any of these ideas can actually be brought forwards. And generally, I've been surprised. One of the reasons why I'm so reluctant to get dived into TiddlyWiki 10 is that I've been endlessly surprised in the past how much mileage there is in fixing the old thing. And it's the positive side of the sunk cost fallacy that there's so much value in not just TiddlyWiki as a thing, but the community around it and so on, that really pulls one towards, let's say, doing things in a backwards compatible way. And I love the fact that this change, variables to tiddlers, that's
It's very elegant.
Exactly, yes. It has a good payoff, I think, as well as, and here we benefit from, it allows us to double up a mechanism so that we'll get double benefit or something from optimizing it. Okay, awesome. I like all that. So I think then where we're back to is that the milestone before we can make meaningful pull requests is test rigs and performance rigs. So test rigs in the sense making sure we don't introduce regressions on existing functionality. And that means reviewing Jasmine and a whole bunch of things we talked about before, I think. And we also need a solid, repeatable basis for performance comparisons, because I'm absolutely with Mario's point that if we came to something that was a big speed improvement in Chrome, but that made things slower in Firefox, we should know about it. So I guess that, but the first one is the first one of making sure we got the functional test. That's the most threatening, I think, because it's, as we've all remarked, it's literally impossible to imagine merging certain types of changes without those tests. The performance tests, I think, there's a bunch of optimizations that I think we'd all be happy to see without needing a performance test.
I did some basic experiments with the stripped down page template, which only contains the stuff that you want to test, but I don't know, 5,000 of them. Yeah, and I think this is a relatively good way to create basic tests for the different widgets. Yeah, so then you exactly know what's causing the delay. Yeah, because there is only, I don't know, 3 types of widgets on the page.
Yeah,
and then you can measure it, and also you can measure differences. So
that's great.
You use TiddlyWiki, I don't know, 1.15. Measure it, because this can be automatically done, and then you make your changes and then measure it again, and then you see the difference. There is still garbage collecting and all the stuff which browsers does or do, and which may change the measurements, and also the all of them, Chrome and Firefox, they have reduced the what is it called? The precision for the timers, because of the 2 bugs that Intel introduced. So I think Firefox reduced the precision for time measurement to 20 microseconds, and Chrome even did it with 1 millisecond or something like this.
If I had to take a wild guess, it's probably possible. I imagine there's some way to opt out of that for purposes of doing developer examinations.
Opt out of what?
To shut off the timer jitter they induce. At least I should hope so.
Yeah, I did just change the number of elements that you use, so you use 1,000 or 5,000 or whatever, which makes sense, so that you really see a difference, and then the jitter, which is introduced by the browser, doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah.
Because you divide by 5,000 and you also divide the jitter, and then you are at the
if the page takes 1,000 years to render, you can get a very good, very accurate measurement.
Yeah, but I did some tests with it, and I think that the basic widgets can be done with the special page templates, and the measurements should be good, so that you really can see a difference. And if you make some changes to the code, then you can see, okay, if there is a regression or not. Which doesn't mean that it's compatible with the existing version, because you may break the table of content or whatever. Yeah, but if we, all the stuff that even discussed, if we can make the table of content more performant, would be a nice thing to do because Eric introduced the automatic highlighting
Yes,
of the talk. But our version of the table of content has some, let's say, makes double listings possible, which is not possible with Eric's version. But it also does highlight two elements in the tree. Yeah, I did some experiments, but they also, I don't know, they used 3 or 4 seconds just to do the highlighting of the visible tiddler. And yeah, that's not usable. So yeah,
we should draw towards a close because I'm mindful of keeping the duration of these things manageable. But before we sort of collect our closing thoughts, I was just going to throw in a fun thought about optimization. I, as you know, have also been working with large data sets, but different sorts of ones than Evan. And one little change that or it's a plugin actually, that I committed last week was a macro that basically does a transclusion where it only renders the transclusion when the transclusion has scrolled into the viewport. Amazingly, it allows me to render an entire book where the story river has every 6,000 tiddlers in it, and as you scroll down, it progressively renders the tiddlers, and it's kind of interesting because it's a very different way of coming at things. Obviously, it only works in the browser, and but it could work, for instance, I think it could work extremely well for the timeline widget. We could make a timeline that, but it shows how.
Did you publish this one?
Yes, it's called dynaview.
Okay. I've seen the commits, but I didn't test it. Okay.
Out of curiosity, do you like cache the element heights or something? I guess that wouldn't be portable.
It's pretty terrible.
In the browser.
Literally, all it does is on a scroll event, it does a query selector all to get all the DOM elements that match something, and then if any of for any of them that are visible that weren't visible before, it looks in 2 data attributes for the name of a tiddler and the value to then push in it. So it's kind of a bit like what you've done. It's kind of correct. It's kind of what you're supposed to do, and it works. Without any. I did wonder whether I might, within the scroll event, do some sort of cunning pre-rendering, but it turns out to be fine. The refresh cycle.
Okay, so it's not using the how is it called? The change observers, which are new in the browsers.
I decided not to, just because of my normal wanting to be very conservative about browsers, and those mutation observers sadly aren't quite there yet. But I guess where I was going with it was thinking about this as a reminder of how a lot of performance issues we're told are about perception, the perception of performance, and we shouldn't lose sight of that as well. That what we're here for is absolutely to improve the absolute performance, but what really matters. And so it may be, in other fields, people have found that making operations that used to be synchronous, asynchronous has been useful. Maybe having modes where service workers do clever things, which I know is something Abraham's interested in. Anyway, just a thought but I love the way that this is going, and look forward to watching it unfold over the next few months. But before we close, anybody, any closing thoughts, questions, anything from anybody else?
There was one more small topic I wanted to introduce in the context of the refresh mechanism.
Okay.
Just so it's fit in while it's cohesive here. As far as testing the performance of TiddlyWiki, like if we're going to have performance tests, I think one thing that is an important sort of metric is testing how performance changes as things scale. I've thought about the idea, for example, of implementing like a little formula timer widget construct to graph out how much time it takes to parse and render a tiddler as that tiddler gets longer and longer and longer, and see if that's actually super linear.
Yeah.
Something related to that I've been thinking about, and this is an architectural change to the refresh mechanism that I'd want to put forward, whether or not variables change. But I think in the long run, one place where this super linearity definitely happens with as wiki complexity climbs is the refresh mechanism. Aside from usually touching every widget in the wiki by rerunning filters, it also necessarily has to, or not widget, every tiddler in the wiki. It also has to refresh every widget. And something I'm very interested in is the idea for these things where you've got, you might have one small widget subtree that's using a certain tiddler that's being displayed, and one tiddler that's changing. It seems to me that it could be redesigned so that the selective refresh mechanism begins the broadcast from those tiddlers, which are actually, or from those widgets that are actually using a tiddler, and subscribe to changes.
I think that's equivalent to the.
It's an observer pattern.
Yes, and maybe equivalent to the way of thinking about it I mentioned before. Yes, okay, that's fine. Yeah.
And that's basically just a change in conventions where they register what tiddlers matter to them, and then the refresh event is sent to those observers rather than the root.
But we need to be able to kind of aggregate them so that if I'm transcoding 4 tiddlers that have these dependencies, then I need to be able to pass to my parents a sort of aggregate of those 4 dependencies as being the criteria for visiting me. So yes, and I wonder whether there's, some of this stuff, I wonder whether it could be done via. Yeah, let's not get into I won't get into speculation, but a very interesting topic, Evan. And
I do have an idea how it could be designed so that you didn't have children listening for the same things as their parents. But yeah, it's a more involved conversation that's probably better for the reflector or another call.
Okay, I did post a link to actual input latency, a browser testing framework from Mozilla, and they are using their screen capturing, and then they are really let's say profiling the perception of users, and how a page actually builds. The resolution is, I don't know, it captures with 90 frames per second or something like this, which limits the resolution. But this is also a very interesting approach where you really can see how a page behaves. And they made a testing framework, so which also can trigger actions on buttons or stuff like this. Just as an information, if you have missed this info.
That's cool. Yeah, no, that's great. I just sent a link to an article by Dan Liu making the point that input latency has been getting worse and worse in the last 50 years. Highly recommended. If you, but we should draw it to a close now. So let's try and have another hangout in the next couple of weeks. We'll ask on the group whether there's an appetite for I should ask whether there's an appetite for a non-developer focused one, but we'll certainly have another developer focused one. Sorry, go on. Somebody was about to.
No. I just wanted to ask the show. So we really should start with the work. So I tried to modify TiddlyWiki organization.
And I will coordinate. I will make a ticket for moving TiddlyWiki 5 to the TiddlyWiki organization, and we'll coordinate with you there. And then the other changes we've talked about come after that.
Yeah, I also wanted to start the new organization because there you can really throw in some tests and maybe break stuff. So for testing or experimenting, if we have to work with existing organization, we have to take a little bit, well, we have to be a little bit more careful, not breaking stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we talked through the reasons, and if we run into those are reasons and principles. So if we run into big technical problems, we can reconsider our principles.
Okay.
But guys, thank you very much. Let's wave goodbye to everybody and stop the broadcast, and then we'll briefly say goodbye before I hang up. So thank you again very much, everybody, for coming along, and see you next time. Cheers. Bye-bye.